The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble corridors of Ravencrest Palace, as Captain Marcus Blackthorne adjusted his ceremonial sword and began his daily rounds. 20 years of service to the royal family had taught him to read the subtle signs of trouble brewing within the palace walls. Today those signs were everywhere. Princess Elena, barely 16 years old, sat quietly in the rose garden, her delicate fingers trembling as she sketched in her art book. The bruise on her left wrist, barely visible beneath her silk gloves, told a story that made Marcus's jaw clench with suppressed anger. For weeks now he had noticed the young princess becoming increasingly withdrawn, her once bright smile replaced by nervous glances and hurried steps through the halls. Queen Duchess Margareta, the king's second wife and Elena's stepmother, ruled the palace with an iron fist disguised in velvet gloves. Her beauty was legendary throughout the kingdom, but Marcus had learned to see past the carefully crafted facade. Behind closed doors, away from the king's watchful eyes, Margareta revealed her true nature. The servants whispered in hushed tones about her cruel treatment of the princess, but none dared speak openly for fear of losing their positions or worse. The tension in the palace had been building for months, since King Aldrich's health began to decline. The royal physician spoke in worried whispers about his weakening condition, and everyone knew that Princess Elena stood to inherit significant power and wealth upon his passing. This knowledge seemed to drive Margareta to even greater cruelty, as if she could somehow break the princess's spirit and claim her inheritance for herself. Marcus remembered Elena as a child, running through these same corridors with infectious laughter. Her golden hair streaming behind her like sunlight, she had always been kind to the guards and servants, treating everyone with genuine warmth and respect. Now at 16 she moved through the palace like a ghost, her eyes downcast and her voice barely above a whisper when she spoke at all. As he rounded the corner near the library, Marcus heard raised voices echoing from within. Through the partially open door, he glimpsed Margareta towering over Elena, who cowered behind a large reading chair. The queen's voice was low and venomous, her words carefully chosen to avoid detection by any passing servants. Elena's response was barely audible, a soft apology that only seemed to fuel Margareta's anger further. The captain's hand instinctively moved to his sword hilt, every instinct screaming at him to intervene. But protocol demanded restraint. He was bound by ancient oaths of loyalty to the crown, and Margareta technically held authority as queen. Any direct action against her could be considered treason, punishable by death. The weight of his position felt heavier than his armor, as he struggled with the impossible choice between duty and conscience. Later that evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Marcus found himself walking past Elena's chambers. The soft sound of crying drifted through the heavy oak door, breaking his heart with each muffled sob. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family. But what good were his strength and skill when the enemy lived within the palace walls, protected by law and custom? The princess's lady-in-waiting, Sarah, emerged from the chambers with red-rimmed eyes and a basket of torn clothing. She startled when she saw Marcus, quickly averting her gaze. In that moment of silence, an understanding passed between them. Sarah had witnessed something terrible, but like Marcus, she was trapped by circumstances beyond her control. The hierarchy of the palace was absolute, and challenging it meant risking everything. As night fell over Ravencrest Palace, Marcus stood at his post outside the throne room, his mind racing with possibilities. The king's condition continued to worsen, and with each passing day, Margareta grew bolder in her treatment of Elena. Something had to be done, but the question remained. How could a loyal guard protect the princess without destroying himself in the process? The answer would come sooner than he expected, and when it did, it would change everything. 3 days passed before Marcus witnessed the incident that would forever change his perspective on duty and honor. The autumn rain drummed against the palace windows as he patrolled the east wing, where the royal family's private chambers were located. The sound of his boots echoed softly on the polished stone floor, a rhythm he had walked countless times over the years. Princess Elena had been summoned to Queen Margareta's sitting room for what was euphemistically called deportment lessons. These sessions had become increasingly frequent and increasingly private, with even Elena's trusted lady-in-waiting, Sarah, being dismissed beforehand. The princess always emerged from these meetings pale and shaken, but when questioned by her father or the court, she would simply nod and claim everything was well. As Marcus approached the sitting room, he heard the unmistakable sound of a hand striking flesh, followed by Elena's sharp intake of breath. His steps faltered and every muscle in his body tensed. Through the slightly ajar door, he could see Margareta standing over the princess, who had fallen to her knees beside an overturned tea service. Porcelain shards scattered across the Persian rug like broken promises. "Clumsy little fool," Margareta hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. "Your father may coddle you, but I will teach you what it means to be worthy of royal blood. Perhaps if you spent less time daydreaming and more time paying attention, you wouldn't humiliate yourself so frequently." Elena's voice was barely audible as she attempted to apologize, but Margareta cut her off with another sharp blow, this time across the princess's shoulder. The young girl's silk dress tore slightly, and Marcus could see the fabric darkening with what he suspected was blood from a cut made by the fallen teacup. "You will learn respect," Margareta continued, grabbing Elena's chin roughly and forcing her to look up. "Your inheritance, your titles, your very future depend on my goodwill. Never forget that I hold your fate in my hands." Marcus felt his vision blur with rage. Every oath he had sworn, every principle he held dear warred against the sight before him. The princess he had watched grow from a laughing child into a frightened young woman was being systematically broken by the very person who should have protected her. His hand moved to his sword without conscious thought, muscle memory and 20 years of training taking over. But as he stepped forward, ready to burst through the door, another voice echoed in his mind, that of his mentor, Sir Edmund, who had trained him decades ago. "A guard's greatest weapon is not his sword, but his wisdom," the old knight had said. "Sometimes the most honorable action is the one that requires the greatest patience and planning." Marcus forced himself to step back into the shadows, his heart pounding with suppressed fury. He needed proof, witnesses, a way to expose Margareta's cruelty without sacrificing his own life and position in the process. If he acted rashly now, Margareta would simply claim he had attacked her unprovoked, and Elena would be left even more vulnerable than before. The session continued for another torturous 20 minutes, with Margareta alternating between psychological torture and physical intimidation. She never left marks that would be visible in court dress, but the damage she inflicted went far deeper than anything that could be seen on the surface. Elena's spirit was being systematically crushed. Her confidence eroded grain by grain until nothing remained but fearful compliance. When the ordeal finally ended, Elena emerged from the sitting room like a broken doll, her movements mechanical and her eyes vacant. She walked past Marcus without seeming to see him, her torn dress hidden beneath a hastily donned shawl. The sight of her retreat filled him with a determination he had never felt before. That night, Marcus sat in his modest quarters writing by candlelight. He began documenting everything he had witnessed, every suspicious bruise, every fearful glance, every whispered conversation among the servants. If he was going to act against the Queen, he would need evidence that even King Aldrich could not ignore. But gathering such proof would require time, and Marcus feared that Elena might not survive much longer under Margareta's increasingly violent attention. As he wrote, a soft knock came at his door. Sarah, Elena's lady-in-waiting, stood in the corridor with tears streaming down her face and a bundle of blood-stained fabric in her arms. Without saying a word, she held up Elena's torn dress from that afternoon, the evidence of Margareta's cruelty stark against the pale silk. In that moment, Marcus knew he had found an ally in his quest for justice. "She's just a child," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "She doesn't deserve this. None of this is her fault." Marcus nodded grimly, inviting Sarah into his quarters and closing the door behind her. "Then we make sure it stops," he said quietly. "But we must be very careful about how we proceed. One wrong move and we could make things worse for the princess." As they began to plan their next steps, neither of them noticed the shadow that detached itself from the wall outside Marcus's door and disappeared into the darkness. Someone had been listening, and now the stakes of their dangerous game had just risen considerably. The shadow that had listened outside Marcus's door belonged to Thomas Crowley, Margareta's personal advisor and the palace's master of whispers. A thin, calculating man with pale eyes and an uncanny ability to appear wherever secrets were being shared, Thomas had served the Queen faithfully since her arrival at Ravencrest Palace. His loyalty was bought with gold and maintained through fear, for he knew too many of Margareta's secrets to ever consider betrayal. By dawn, Thomas had reported every word of the conversation between Marcus and Sarah to his mistress. Margarita received the news while being dressed by her servants, her beautiful face remaining perfectly composed even as her mind raced with implications. She had always known that Marcus posed a potential threat. His reputation for honor and his obvious affection for Princess Elena made him dangerous. Now that he was actively working against her, she would need to act quickly to neutralize the threat. Double the princess's lessons, Margarita instructed Thomas as she admired her reflection in the ornate mirror, and ensure that Captain Blackthorne is assigned to duties that keep him far from the East Wing. I have plans for our dear Elena that require absolute privacy. Meanwhile, Marcus spent the morning gathering intelligence from other members of the Guard who had served the royal family for years. Sergeant William Hayes, a grizzled veteran who had known Elena since birth, confirmed what Marcus had suspected. The princess's behavior had changed dramatically since Margareta's arrival. Where once she had been confident and outgoing, she now flinched at unexpected sounds and avoided eye contact with authority figures. "It breaks my heart to see what's become of her," Hayes confided as they walked the battlements overlooking the palace gardens. "She used to light up every room she entered. Now she moves through the palace like she's afraid of her own shadow. Something needs to be done, Marcus. But we both know how dangerous it would be to act without absolute proof." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard below. Princess Elena was being escorted by two of Margarita's personal guards toward a carriage bearing the Queen's coat of arms. The princess looked around desperately as if seeking help, but her guards maintained firm grips on her arms. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the terror in her eyes. "Where are they taking her?" Marcus demanded, his hand instinctively moving to his sword. Before Hayes could answer, Thomas Crowley appeared at Marcus's shoulder, his thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Her Majesty has decided that the princess requires more intensive education in proper royal behavior. She will be spending the next few weeks at Thornfield Manor, the Queen's private estate in the countryside. Quite isolated, I'm told. Perfect for concentrated learning without distractions." The implications of Thomas's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Thornfield Manor was notorious among the palace staff as a place where Margarita's enemies disappeared, never to return in quite the same condition they had left. If Elena was taken there, she would be completely at the Queen's mercy with no witnesses and no possibility of rescue. "By whose authority?" Marcus asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the fury building inside him. "By royal decree, of course," Thomas replied smoothly, producing a document bearing King Aldrich's seal. His Majesty was quite concerned about his daughter's recent melancholy and agreed that a change of scenery might benefit her disposition. Marcus studied the document, noting the shaky signature that betrayed the king's declining health. Aldrich was barely conscious most days now, heavily medicated for pain and easily manipulated by those he trusted. Margarita had clearly taken advantage of one of his rare lucid moments to secure this authorization, probably presenting it as a beneficial retreat rather than what it truly was, a prison sentence. As the carriage disappeared through the palace gates, Marcus felt a cold determination settle over him. The time for careful planning and gathering evidence had passed. Princess Elena's life now hung in the balance, and every hour of delay increased the danger she faced. He would need to act quickly and decisively, even if it meant sacrificing his own position and possibly his life. That evening, Marcus sought out the one person in the palace who might have the power to help him, Lady Catherine Westbrook, the king's sister and Elena's aunt. Catherine had always been fond of her niece and possessed both the political connections and the financial resources to challenge Margarita's authority. More importantly, she was one of the few people in court who had never been intimidated by the Queen's beauty or apparent power. He found Lady Catherine in her private study, reading by candlelight despite the late hour. She looked up as he entered, her sharp blue eyes immediately recognizing the urgency in his manner. Catherine had always been perceptive, a trait that had kept her alive and influential through several changes in royal leadership. "Captain Blackthorne," she said, setting aside her book, "I assume this isn't a social call. You look like a man carrying the weight of the kingdom on his shoulders." "Your ladyship," Marcus began, choosing his words carefully, "I believe Princess Elena is in grave danger. Queen Margareta has taken her to Thornfield Manor under the pretense of education, but I fear her true intentions are far more sinister." Lady Catherine's expression hardened. She had suspected Margareta's true nature for months, but had been unable to prove anything concrete. The Queen was too clever, too careful in her cruelty to leave obvious evidence behind. But if Marcus was willing to risk everything to bring her this warning, the situation must be desperate indeed. "Tell me everything you know," Catherine commanded, her voice carrying the authority of her royal blood. "And Captain, if what you're suggesting is true, we may be Elena's only hope for survival." As Marcus began to recount everything he had witnessed, both he and Lady Catherine knew they were embarking on a dangerous path that would either save Princess Elena or destroy them all in the attempt. Lady Catherine listened to Marcus's account with growing horror and determination. As the king's sister, she had witnessed palace intrigue for decades, but the systematic abuse of a 16-year-old girl struck her as particularly heinous. When Marcus finished his report, Catherine sat in silence for several moments, her fingers drumming against the polished wood of her desk as she considered their options. "Thornfield Manor is a fortress," she said finally. "Margareta chose it precisely because it's nearly impossible to approach undetected. The estate is surrounded by dense forest and guarded by men who answer only to her. A direct assault would be suicide, and by the time we could gather enough evidence to challenge her legally, Elena might be beyond help." Marcus nodded grimly. He had already considered and discarded several rescue plans, each one ending in failure or death. "What do you suggest, your ladyship? I cannot simply stand by while the princess suffers." Catherine rose from her chair and moved to a large tapestry depicting the royal coat of arms. With practiced movements, she pushed aside the heavy fabric to reveal a hidden safe built into the stone wall. From within, she withdrew a leather portfolio containing documents and maps that Marcus immediately recognized as highly classified intelligence. "There is another way," Catherine said, spreading a detailed map of Thornfield Manor across her desk. "These are the original architectural plans from when the estate was built 50 years ago. Notice here, there's a series of tunnels beneath the manor that connect to the old wine cellars. They were designed as escape routes during times of siege, but they could serve our purposes equally well." Marcus studied the map intently, his tactical mind immediately grasping the possibilities. The tunnels would allow a small team to infiltrate the manor undetected, but the operation would still be incredibly dangerous. "How many men would we need?" "As few as possible," Catherine replied. "The more people involved, the greater the chance of discovery. I'm thinking you, myself, and perhaps 2 other trusted individuals. We go in quietly, extract Elena, and disappear before anyone realizes what has happened." "Absolutely not," Marcus said firmly. "I will not allow you to risk your life, your ladyship. This is my responsibility." Catherine's eyes flashed with determination that reminded Marcus powerfully of her royal bloodline. "Captain, that girl is my niece, and I have failed her by not acting sooner. Besides, you'll need someone with authority to challenge Margareta if we're discovered. My presence could mean the difference between rescue and execution." While they debated strategy, 3 miles away at Thornfield Manor, Princess Elena sat in a locked room on the 3rd floor, staring out through barred windows at the moonlit forest beyond. Her afternoon journey had been a nightmare of fear and uncertainty, with Margareta's guards maintaining threatening silence throughout the ride. Upon arrival, she had been immediately confined to this sparse chamber with only a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a single chair for furnishing. Margareta had visited once since their arrival, ostensibly to check on Elena's comfort, but actually to deliver a chilling message. "You are here to learn absolute obedience," the Queen had said, her beautiful face transformed by cold malice. "Your father cannot protect you here, and your screams will carry no further than these stone walls. By the time I am finished with you, you will beg for the privilege of renouncing your inheritance." The threat had been delivered with such casual cruelty that Elena felt her remaining courage crumble. She had always known that Margareta disliked her, but the depth of the Queen's hatred was shocking. For the first time, Elena truly understood that her stepmother intended to destroy her completely, body and spirit, until nothing remained but a broken shell that would sign away everything at Margareta's command. As night deepened, Elena huddled on the narrow bed and tried to think of escape plans. The window was too high and too well barred for her to break through, and the heavy oak door was locked from the outside with what sounded like multiple bolts. She had no weapons, no allies, and no idea if anyone even knew where she had been taken. The isolation was almost worse than the physical confinement. leaving her alone with her fears and imagination. Back at Ravencrest Palace, Marcus and Lady Catherine had finalized their rescue plan. They would depart at dawn with two trusted allies, Sergeant Hayes and Sir Edmund, Marcus's old mentor who had recently returned from diplomatic service. The group would travel to the forest surrounding Thornfield Manor and wait for nightfall before attempting their infiltration through the hidden tunnels. "There's one more thing," Catherine said as they prepared to part ways for the night. "I've sent a message to Lord Chancellor Morrison requesting an emergency audience with the king. If we succeed in rescuing Elena, we'll need someone in authority to hear her testimony before Margareta can silence her permanently. Morrison is one of the few court officials who isn't in the Queen's pocket." Marcus felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. With Lady Catherine's political connections and his military skills combined, they might actually succeed in saving Elena and exposing Margareta's crimes. But he also knew that failure would mean death for all of them, and possibly an even worse fate for the princess they were trying to save. As he returned to his quarters to prepare for the mission, Marcus offered a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening. Tomorrow would bring either justice or disaster, and the life of an innocent girl hung in the balance. The loyal guard who had once sworn to protect the royal family with his life was about to discover just how far that oath would take him when honor and duty demanded. Everything he had to give, the rescue mission, would begin at first light, and Marcus knew that by tomorrow night, either Princess Elena would be free or they would all be dead. There was no middle ground in the dangerous game they were about to play against one of the most ruthless women in the kingdom. Dawn broke gray and cold over Ravencrest Palace as Marcus made his final preparations for the rescue mission. He had spent the sleepless night checking and rechecking his equipment, ensuring that every weapon was sharp and every piece of armor properly secured. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical burden, but his resolve remained unshaken. Princess Elena's life depended on their success, and failure was not an option he could accept. Lady Catherine arrived at the designated meeting point dressed in practical traveling clothes, her usual court finery replaced by dark leather and sturdy boots. She carried a sword at her hip, with the easy familiarity of someone who had learned to fight long before royal protocol demanded that ladies remain decorative and defenseless. Marcus was reminded that Catherine had grown up during turbulent times when even royal women needed to defend themselves. Sergeant Hayes and Sir Edmund completed their small rescue party, both men chosen for their loyalty and discretion rather than their numbers. Hayes brought his intimate knowledge of palace security and his unwavering devotion to Princess Elena, while Sir Edmund contributed decades of experience in covert operations during his diplomatic career. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but Marcus believed their motivation and careful planning could overcome those disadvantages. The journey to Thornfield Manor took most of the day, following little-used forest paths that kept them hidden from the main roads where Margareta's spies might spot them. They traveled in silence, each member of the group lost in their own thoughts about the dangers ahead. The autumn forest was beautiful in its dying glory, but Marcus found no peace in the golden leaves and crisp air. Every moment of delay meant another hour of suffering for Elena. As evening shadows lengthened, they reached the edge of the cleared land surrounding Thornfield Manor. The imposing stone building rose from the landscape like a medieval fortress, its narrow windows glowing with torchlight that made it appear even more menacing. Guards patrolled the walls with military precision, their weapons gleaming in the fading daylight. Marcus counted at least 20 men visible, and he knew there would be others inside the building itself. "The tunnel entrance should be about 200 yards to the east," Catherine whispered, consulting the architectural plans one final time. "According to these drawings, it opens into a natural cave formation that's concealed by a grove of ancient oak trees. If the entrance hasn't been discovered and sealed, we should be able to reach the wine cellars undetected." They waited until full darkness had fallen before beginning their approach. Moving through the forest like ghosts, they used every shadow and tree trunk for concealment as they made their way toward the hidden entrance. Marcus's heart pounded with anticipation and fear, but his movements remained steady and sure. 20 years of military training had prepared him for moments like this, when everything depended on skill, courage, and luck. The cave entrance was exactly where the plans indicated, hidden behind a curtain of hanging vines and partially blocked by fallen stones. Sir Edmund, the smallest member of their group, squeezed through the opening first to scout the tunnel beyond. After several tense minutes, he returned with good news. The passage was clear and showed signs of recent use, though whether by Margarita's people or smugglers remained unclear. Inside Thornfield Manor, Princess Elena had spent the day in growing despair. Margarita had visited twice more, each time escalating her threats and demands. The Queen wanted Elena to sign documents renouncing her claims to the throne and her father's vast personal fortune, transferring everything to Margarita's control. So far, Elena had refused, but she could feel her resistance weakening under the constant pressure and fear. "You stubborn little fool," Margarita hissed during her evening visit, backhanding Elena across the face with enough force to split her lip. "Do you think your precious father will live forever? He grows weaker every day, and when he dies, I will be the only authority that matters. Sign the papers now, while you still have the chance to do so with dignity and tact." Elena tasted blood as she struggled to maintain her defiance. "I will never betray my father's trust," she whispered through swollen lips. "No matter what you do to me." Margarita's laugh was cold and merciless. "We shall see about that, my dear. Tomorrow we begin the more persuasive methods of education. I assure you, by the time I am finished, you will beg for the privilege of signing anything I place before you." The Queen departed with a rustle of silk, leaving Elena alone with her terror and the growing certainty that she would not survive much longer without help. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall and tried to find courage in memories of her father's love and the loyalty of people like Captain Blackthorne. Somewhere in her heart she still hoped that rescue might come, though logic told her that no one even knew where she was. In the tunnels beneath the manor, Marcus and his companions made steady progress through the ancient passageways. The stone corridors were narrow and musty, filled with the accumulated dust of decades, but they were also blessedly empty of guards or other obstacles. Sir Edmund led the way with a shielded lantern, while Marcus brought up the rear to ensure they weren't being followed. According to the architectural plans, the wine cellars connected directly to a service stairway that would take them to the main floors of the manor. From there, they would need to locate Elena's room and extract her without alerting the numerous guards stationed throughout the building. It was a dangerous plan with little margin for error, but it was their only hope of reaching the princess before Margarita's persuasive methods began in earnest. As they climbed the narrow stairs toward the manor proper, Marcus offered a silent prayer for Elena's continued strength and safety. The rescue was about to begin in earnest, and within the next few hours they would either achieve the impossible or die in the attempt. The loyal guard who had sworn to protect the royal family was finally putting his oath to the ultimate test. The service stairway emerged into a dimly lit corridor on the ground floor of Thornfield Manor, exactly as the architectural plans had indicated. Marcus peered through the crack in the concealed door, counting 2 guards stationed at the far end of the hallway near what appeared to be the main entrance. Their rescue party would need to move quickly and silently to avoid detection, using the building's own shadows and blind spots against Margarita's security forces. Sir Edmund consulted a small sketch he had made based on Lady Catherine's intelligence about the manor's layout. "The princess should be held on the 3rd floor eastern wing," he whispered barely audibly. "We'll need to reach the main staircase without being seen, then navigate 2 more levels of guards and locked doors. They moved through the manor like specters, their soft-soled boots making no sound on the stone floors. Marcus's military training served him well as he identified guard positions and patrol patterns, timing their movements to slip past sentries during the brief moments when corridors were empty. Lady Catherine proved surprisingly adept at stealth, her courtly grace translating seamlessly into silent, flowing movements that left no trace of their passage. On the 2nd floor, they encountered their first real obstacle, a guard stationed directly outside the stairway they needed to access. Sergeant Hayes volunteered to create a distraction, slipping away to trigger a minor commotion in the opposite wing of the building. When shouts and running footsteps echoed from that direction, the guard abandoned his post to investigate, giving the rescue party just enough time to reach the 3rd floor undetected. Meanwhile, in her locked chamber, Princess Elena had fallen into an exhausted sleep despite her fear and discomfort. Her dreams were filled with nightmarish visions of Margarita's threats and the growing certainty that no rescue would come. She startled awake when she heard the soft scratch of metal against metal outside her door, her heart racing as she wondered if the queen had returned for another session of psychological torture. Marcus knelt before Elena's door with a set of lockpicks he had carried since his days as a young soldier, when unconventional skills often meant the difference between mission success and failure. The locks were well made but not impossible to defeat, and after several tense minutes of careful manipulation, he heard the satisfying click of tumblers falling into place. Lady Catherine stood guard while Sir Edmund watched the stairway, their weapons drawn and ready for the fight they all knew was coming. The door swung open to reveal Princess Elena sitting on her narrow bed, her face bruised and her clothing torn, but her eyes still showing the spark of defiance that Margareta had been unable to extinguish. When she saw Marcus framed in the doorway, her expression shifted from terror to disbelief to overwhelming relief. She started to speak, but he quickly placed a finger to his lips and motioned for silence. "Your Highness," Marcus whispered as he helped her to her feet. "We're here to take you home. Can you walk quietly? We have a dangerous journey ahead of us." Elena nodded mutely, tears of gratitude streaming down her face as she realized that someone had indeed come for her. Lady Catherine embraced her niece briefly, checking her for serious injuries before they began their retreat. The princess was weak from stress and limited food, but her determination to escape gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Their descent through the manor proved more challenging than their infiltration, as Elena's weakened condition and emotional state made silent movement more difficult. They were forced to take several detours when guards appeared unexpectedly, and Marcus began to worry that their luck was running out. The longer they remained in the building, the greater the chance that someone would discover Elena's empty room and raise the alarm. That discovery came sooner than expected. Thomas Crowley had made it his habit to check on the princess every few hours, reporting her condition to Margareta with sadistic pleasure. When he found the empty chamber and the picked locks, his thin face twisted with rage and alarm. Within minutes, the entire manor was in uproar as guards searched every room and corridor for the escaped prisoner and her rescuers. "Find them," Margareta commanded when Thomas brought her the news. Her beautiful face had become a mask of cold fury that would have terrified even her most loyal followers. "They cannot have gone far, and they must not be allowed to reach the outside world. Kill the rescuers if necessary, but bring the princess back to me alive. I have special plans for her punishment." The rescue party heard the alarm bells and shouting guards as they reached the second floor, their careful stealth now impossible to maintain. Marcus made the instant decision to abandon their original escape route through the tunnels, as those passages would become death traps if the guards discovered them. Instead, he led them toward the manor's main entrance, hoping to fight their way out through sheer audacity and speed. Sir Edmund took the lead as they burst into the main hall, his sword cutting down two surprised guards before they could raise the alarm further. Lady Catherine fought beside him with deadly grace, her blade finding the gaps in enemy armor with the precision of years of training. Sergeant Hayes guarded their rear while Marcus protected Princess Elena, his shield deflecting crossbow bolts and sword strikes as they carved a path toward freedom. The battle was fierce but brief, as the element of surprise and their desperate determination overcame the numerical advantage of Margareta's forces. When they burst through the main doors into the courtyard, horses were already waiting. Sir Edmund had arranged for their escape mounts to be positioned by loyal allies who had infiltrated the area earlier. As they galloped away from Thornfield Manor with Princess Elena safe behind Marcus on his warhorse, the captain allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. They had achieved the impossible and rescued the princess from Margareta's clutches. But he also knew that their real battle was just beginning, as they would now need to expose the Queen's crimes and protect Elena from further retaliation. The loyal guard's greatest test still lay ahead, in the halls of power where truth and justice would need to triumph over corruption and cruelty. The ride back to Ravencrest Palace became a race against time as Marcus and his companions pushed their horses through the night, knowing that Margareta would soon dispatch pursuit parties to recapture Elena. The princess clung to Marcus with fierce determination, drawing strength from his steady presence and the knowledge that she was finally safe from her stepmother's cruelty. Behind them, the glow of torches could be seen spreading through the forest as the Queen's guards began their search. Lady Catherine had sent word ahead through her network of loyal servants, ensuring that Lord Chancellor Morrison would be waiting, with a full tribunal of court officials when they arrived. The evidence they carried, Elena's torn and blood-stained clothing, Sarah's testimony, and Marcus's detailed written account, would finally expose Margaretta's true nature to those with the power to act against her. As dawn broke over the palace walls, their exhausted party clattered into the main courtyard to find King Aldrich himself waiting for them, supported by his personal physicians but alert enough to demand answers. The sight of his beloved daughter's bruised face and torn clothing struck him like a physical blow, and for the first time in months, righteous anger burned away the fog of illness that had clouded his mind. "Father," Elena whispered, sliding down from Marcus's horse and running to embrace the king despite his frail condition. "She tried to make me sign papers giving away everything. She said you were dying and that she would control the kingdom after you were gone." King Aldrich's weathered hands shook with rage as he examined his daughter's injuries, each bruise and cut adding fuel to the fire building within him. "Where is Queen Margareta?" he demanded, his voice carrying the authority that had once commanded armies and conquered kingdoms. "Still at Thornfield Manor, Your Majesty," Marcus reported, dismounting and dropping to one knee before his sovereign. "She had Princess Elena imprisoned and was systematically torturing her to force a renunciation of her inheritance. We have witnesses and evidence of her crimes." Before the king could respond, a commotion at the palace gates announced the arrival of Queen Margareta herself, accompanied by Thomas Crowley and a contingent of her personal guards. She had clearly ridden hard through the night, her usually perfect appearance disheveled and her beautiful face twisted with fury. When she saw Elena standing safely beside her father, Margareta's mask of controlled elegance finally slipped completely. "Aldrich," she called out, her voice dripping with false concern. "Thank God you're safe. These criminals kidnapped our daughter from her educational retreat and filled her head with lies. Captain Blackthorne has clearly gone mad with jealousy and fabricated these absurd accusations to justify his treasonous actions." King Aldrich studied his wife with eyes that saw clearly for the first time since their marriage. The illness that had clouded his judgment was still present, but his love for Elena burned away the confusion that had allowed Margareta to manipulate him for so long. "Explain these injuries," he said quietly, indicating the obvious signs of abuse on his daughter's face and arms. "Accidents during her lessons," Margareta replied smoothly, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Elena has always been clumsy, and she fell several times during her deportment training. Really, Aldrich, you're being manipulated by people who want to drive a wedge between us." Lady Catherine stepped forward with the bundle of blood-stained clothing and the detailed testimony they had gathered. "Brother, the evidence speaks for itself. This woman has been systematically abusing your daughter for months, and yesterday she attempted to force Elena to sign documents renouncing her inheritance. We have witnesses, physical evidence, and Elena's own testimony." The trial that followed was swift and decisive. Lord Chancellor Morrison presented the evidence with clinical precision, while Princess Elena bravely recounted her months of suffering under Margareta's cruelty. Sarah and several other servants came forward to testify about what they had witnessed, their fear of retaliation overcome by their loyalty to the princess and their desire for justice. Margareta maintained her innocence throughout the proceedings, but her composure cracked when confronted with the overwhelming evidence against her. When Marcus testified about what he had seen and heard, describing Margareta's threats and violence in clear, measured terms, even her most loyal supporters began to distance themselves from the fallen queen. "You have committed crimes against the crown, against an innocent child, and against every principle of honor and decency," King Aldrich pronounced when the evidence had been presented. His voice was weak from illness, but his words carried the full weight of royal authority. "You are hereby stripped of all titles and privileges, banished from this kingdom forever, and forbidden from ever setting foot on our lands again." Thomas Crowley and several of Margareta's guards were also arrested and charged with conspiracy, their network of spies and enforcers dismantled in the days that followed. The palace began to feel like a place of safety and joy again, as the atmosphere of fear and suspicion that had poisoned it for so long finally lifted. Princess Elena recovered slowly from her ordeal, but with the love and support of her father, and the protection of loyal guards like Marcus, she gradually regained her confidence and spirit. She insisted that Marcus be honored for his courage and loyalty, and King Aldrich gladly elevated the captain to the position of Elena's personal protector and advisor. You saved my daughter's life and preserved the honor of our kingdom. The king told Marcus during the ceremony, recognizing his service. You proved that true loyalty sometimes requires the courage to act against authority, when that authority becomes corrupt. Princess Elena could have no better guardian than a man who values justice above his own safety. As Margaretta's carriage disappeared beyond the kingdom's borders, never to return, Marcus stood watch over the palace with renewed purpose. He had learned that protecting the royal family sometimes meant protecting them from each other, and that the greatest threats to the crown often came from within rather than without. The loyal guard who had once sworn to serve had discovered that true service sometimes demanded the courage to rebel against those who would abuse their power. Princess Elena grew into a wise and compassionate ruler under Marcus's protection, never forgetting the lessons learned during her darkest hours about the importance of surrounding oneself with people of true character and unwavering loyalty. The kingdom prospered under her eventual reign, built on foundations of justice and honor that had been tested in the crucible of adversity and emerged stronger than ever before.